Thank you, Professor Bastian. والآن مع جلسة النقاش الأولى عن أثر المهارات والكفاءات على تطوير رأس المال البشري ودعم الاقتصاد الوطني، والتي سيقوم برئاستها سعادة الدكتور غازي بن زقر. يعمل الدكتور غازي رئيساً لمركز وصال التطوير ونائباً لرئيس شركة عبد الله وسعيد محمد بير بن زقر، وعضواً في المجلس الاستشاري الشرفي لجامعة عفت، وعضواً في مجلس إدارة مركز خديجة بنت خويلد بالغرفة التجارية الصناعية بجدة، كما أنه عضو في لجنة الموارد البشرية في مجلس الشورى. وتعنى هذه اللجنة بالتنمية العامة في المملكة وحاجات المستفيدين، وتعزيز الرؤية الوطنية ومفهوم المواطنة المسؤولة، وتطوير بيئة العمل في المملكة وجعلها أكثر جذباً لعمل المواطن، وخاصة في القطاع الخاص، وتطوير الإنتاج والقدرة على الإنتاج، وتوليد الوظائف والقضاء على البطالة، والتأكيد على مفهوم حياة كريمة من خلال عمل كريم لكل مواطن، وتفعيل دور الشباب في التنمية، والتأكيد على أهميته، وتأصيل مفهوم العمل عبادة والدين معاملة، وطلب العلم من المهد إلى اللحد في الجيل الجديد، والسعي لتطوير الأجهزة التربوية والتعليمية في المملكة، والتأكيد على ضرورة تناغمها وارتباط مخرجاتها مع احتياج سوق العمل والمجتمع. يسعدني الآن أن أدعو سعادة الدكتور غازي بن زقر إلى المنصة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله. يشرفني الآن أني أستدعي الثلاثة المتحدثون اللي كانوا تحدثوا معنا الصباح اليوم حتى نتحاور معهم، واستأذنكم أنه الحوار حيكون باللغة الإنجليزية لأن هي لغتهم الأم. إذا أي إنسان عنده إشكالية في اللغة الإنجليزية وحاببني أترجم اللغة العربية أو العكس، أنا إن شاء الله يشرفني. I'd like to ask the three speakers that have presented to us this morning to kindly come up so that we can have an open discussion with the audience about the questions that they have. Thank you. It's a real honor and a huge privilege for me to be with you all today. I'm really delighted that we have an open engagement with expertise from all over the world. Particularly I'm delighted that we have today representation from countries such as Australia, New Zealand, and European Union. Perhaps if the audience has a question to begin with, I'll be happy to begin with it, but maybe I'll just say a few things in the beginning about how we view it from our perspective. I mean, clearly we are at the very beginning of attempting to put a framework in our country similar to what we've already done. And the concern often in Saudi Arabia is that we can make this from the theory of it to the successful practice of it. And so perhaps the first question, and maybe I can with you, Doctor, is how in the early ages, when we first started, without the power of the legislation, can one begin to gain acceptance and momentum for a country to see the value of the framework? So beginning with that, perhaps have a bit of a word on that and maybe get it from the audience.
Yes, I think that's one of the strange things about the Australian Qualifications Framework. We talk very strongly about it being an agreement, right from the very start. It's an agreement between the Commonwealth Minister of Education, the Commonwealth Minister of Training, each state and territory minister. We involve industry, we involve unions, teacher unions, workers, very closely monitored its development. So that initial document, that first one, was an agreed document by the education community and the labour community. So I think we got acceptance from the very start because of that negotiation at very, very early days. I would argue that initially it was very much a TED framework. We argued it was very much a national schools TED higher education, but the strong engagement was seen to be through the labour market needs, labour market outcomes. So it had a very, very strong acceptance in TED and it had an economic outcome. We needed that to be a skilled workforce. It seemed to be that higher education on the other hand insisted on academic grants and freedom of the universities, but the framework does not tell universities what they must teach. It tells how you construct qualifications and what the outcome of qualifications is, and that took a lot of time. So there was a weakness in our framework in that sector, but we argued that the schools reflected what they were doing until we developed that acceptance. Because it was agreed, I think that's how we got the acceptance. The story has an economic influence on social. So that's really.
Thank you. Our experience, was a little different in that our framework was always mandated under legislation, but the scope of that mandate was quite limited to begin with. So the focus initially was on the industry training, the workplace training that is undertaken, and ensuring that there were common standards and that there was an ability to proceed with lifelong learning. And that was, we had a Minister of Education at that time who was absolutely committed to lifelong learning and the ability of people to move between environments. So we started with occupational standards and we started with a competency-based framework, and this part of the sector was very enthusiastic about using those. Still closer.
Can you go louder?
Can I go louder? Sorry. Okay. Is that better? So now it's echoing at me. So our industry and our employers were very enthusiastic about the opportunity for recognising the standards and the ability to recognise the learning of their workers, and that became our initial position. In the early days, there was also encouragement to extend the use of standards, to competency standards, to a wider range of occupations, such as some of the health occupations and higher education areas. But that did not fly very well. There was a high level of resistance to that. So I think that once the framework itself was established, then it became part of our landscape, and then it became increasingly used and a more open willingness to adopt it and see the benefit of it extended across the rest of our sector. And that was the point at which we were able to establish the second framework, the Register of Quality Assured Qualifications. But we did ensure that there was respect paid to the higher education sector, and that at that point for them it was a voluntary commitment, whereas for the rest of our sector it was a compulsory commitment. So,
yes, I think the big question about how do you get acceptance is the. Oh?
They want you to have that microphone.
Okay, sorry. It's really about what are your expectations from a framework? Is there a shared vision on what the framework can do? And if that is the case, then you also get a shared sort of acceptance. One of the issues in the beginning of the development of the European framework, or some national frameworks in Europe, was that everybody thought this is the universal panacea. It's going to solve every single problem we ever had in the education sector. And of course, they don't do this. So if you expect this from the Saudi Arabia qualification framework, you might get a bit disappointed. It will help with a lot of things. It will support other reforms, but it is one tool which needs to be accompanied by other tools. Also, I think one has to understand and accept that it is a long-term process, a long-term reform process. In order to move to a system which is based on competences, you need a change of mentality. A change of the mentality of the people in all kinds of education institutions, and the international framework can catalyze this kind of change of mentality. But still, it's going to take a while. So let's say in a culture, my understanding is that sometimes you like to have very quick results. The framework here can help, but still, you might need to be patient with the long-term reform success until it really shows all the potential benefits. So, but the important thing is this change of mentality of the individuals, top down, bottom up, in all kinds of institutions, and to really ensure that such a framework is for the benefit of everybody. Everybody wants to have one thing in Saudi Arabia, namely a stronger economy, a more diversified economy, a better quality, or a better, more high quality education system in general, and this is what every single person, no matter which sector they come from, is believing in, and this is the unifying element of the framework.
So, Professor, perhaps we can elaborate a little before going to the audience, and maybe make it a little more centric on the experience that each segment will experience. Should we be successful in the implementation of such a framework? So, imagine, inshallah, 5 years from now, in the kingdom, we have successfully implemented this framework. Help us understand what kind of a difference will it make to the citizens. So the average human being in the country of Saudi Arabia, what will they experience as a result of the successful implementation of this framework? And then maybe you can look at what would be the benefits that the institution of higher learning will experience, and then maybe the job providers.
Okay. I think one of the major differences that you will hopefully see a little bit down the line is really a different experience in the classroom, in where teaching and learning is taking place. If the framework is supporting this competence-based model, the whole way of how teaching, learning, and assessment is organized, is performed, is going to change. It's much more focused on the individual, on their personal growth, on them acquiring new sets of skills and competences, and less on the simple provision of content. And all of this is going to be much better linked to the needs and requirements of the labor market. In many countries, also here, people raise this as a challenge, that there's maybe a discrepancy between the competences and skills of graduates and what is needed and required on the labor market. So this might also be something that is of a tool. And one thing that I believe is very important is this whole concept of lifelong learning, that you can move throughout various qualifications, various learning throughout your life, and also a general strengthening of the technical and vocational education training sector I see here very important. At the moment, qualifications in the TVET sector are by parents not considered to be as of equal value as higher education qualifications. Everybody wants their children to study medicine, engineering, and so on. Because often technical vocational education training qualifications are dead-end qualifications. So once you start in this sector, you can't really move across. Yeah? And this framework, if implemented properly, it really ensures better permeability throughout the system, really focusing on the individuals and their personal growth.
Would you both agree with that? Perhaps I give you the microphone to add some thoughts. particularly from the quality assurance point of view, which was mentioned in your presentations. So the issue would be that somehow with a successful framework, there would be an assurance of quality. However, there would also be concerns around the amount of effort and time that institutions have to go through to be able to provide the information that must be provided to the authorities that would monitor such a quality. So perhaps you could elaborate on those points.
Okay, two things come to mind. The first one is that in our quality assurance standards for TVET, all qualifications that are approved through the TVET system have to be endorsed by industry. So we actually say they are industry competency standards, and they are qualifications. We cluster the competencies for a qualification outcome. So within our quality assurance, they can't be developed unless they're approved by industry. Within the threshold standards now in the university sector, for want of a better term, there is a real link now to programs being linked to industry requirements. So it's strengthening it there in the quality assurance process. In Australia, we only regulate AQF qualifications. Providers can run training, short programs in any area that they wish, but they cannot make any claim that it is a qualification, or they even name our qualification titles, which are basically protected, nor can they issue a certificate with the AQF logo. So it doesn't preclude activities, small capture training that might be quite specialist. However, the providers do need to demonstrate that they meet specific quality standards to be able to conduct programs under the AQF and to issue the certificate, because every provider in Australia issues the certificate. They are the issuing body. So it's quite clear, yes, they have to meet the requirements, but we had a quality assurance structure prior to the AQF where requirements were to be met by all providers. So we're talking 25 to 30 years of standards of some description. So it hasn't been an immediate burden. It's slowly, and I would say the standards have become more refined. They're more outcomes focused, whereas before they weren't. They were more inputs focused. But it has been a slow period, so it wasn't a shock that they had to wake up one morning and say, I must comply with this. It has always been in place since the 70s.
You helped us during the presentation to realise that there's a delicate balance that must be maintained between the flexibility of such a framework and yet its ability to create something or a standard that we can all be proud of. Perhaps you can elaborate on that and the difficulty of striking that balance.
I'll try. I think the balance is the reason why we believe within our quality assurance framework that we should be focusing on what's important, not just what we can focus on. And so that is why we put the emphasis on the organisation itself, knowing how it is doing a good job and how it is assuring itself that the programs and qualifications that it is offering to its students are those that are right for the students and right for the industries and sectors that the students will go into as employees. So we require of a new qualification a needs analysis to identify why this qualification is needed by the industry, and that's particularly within our TVET system. Over the years, and just in the last year, we have spent time trying to simplify the requirements that we have of an organisation when they apply to us for quality assurance. So we have put a big focus on really asking ourselves what is the most important things we need to see to achieve that balance between quality enhancement and accountability and assurance. And we are continuing to be challenged by that. We have recently had a commission called the Productivity Commission who have looked at our tertiary education system and made some suggestions as to how to simplify it further and remove the perception at times that the requirements prevent people from moving forward as fast as they would like. But when we look at the criteria, it is not the criteria that are the barrier in any sense. The criteria are very relevant and very pertinent to what is required. And when something goes wrong, which from time to time it does, particularly within our private training education organisations, then we need to have the information to enable us to act as a regulator. And it is achieving that is where the tension sits between how can we enable our organisations to continue to innovate and do as they want quickly, but yet if something does happen, that we have the tools and the information required in order to take appropriate action, because our government and our reputation as a country for education is utterly dependent on having that balance and having both aspects of that equation.
Thank you. خلينا ناخذ الآن أسئلة الحضور. نبدأ بالأخوات. تفضلي.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Hello. Okay, I know. Anyway, I have a built-in mic. زي ما شاء الله. I'm Hussein Morshin from Education Evaluation Commission, and I do have a question. First of all, thank you all for your presentation and provided information. However, I do have a question for any of you. You talked about the levels, about the benefits of having a qualification framework. I would like to know more about learning outcomes, and like how did you define or identify learning outcomes at each level, and then if there were more learning domains that are associated with these learning outcomes. Thank you.
In Australia, for once, we kept it simple. Knowledge, skills and application. That's what we saw as critical. We also acknowledge that the different sectors may put emphasis on one domain more than the other domain. That is certainly the case in the higher education sector. We know they put more emphasis on the knowledge. But for TVET, it is clearly knowledge, skills and application. I think one of the exciting things about my job has been to analyse qualifications frameworks around the world, and they can tell you so much about what they think is important to them. At the end of the day, I think you have to work out what domains are important to your qualifications, but also whether you want to change. To me, frameworks can reflect what you do, or they can bring change. And that's where, in some areas, where they can bring change. In Malaysia, they're very clear that their qualifications must meet each of their domains, and that includes the employability type domains. So it really depends on each country's needs. And I look for logic in the frameworks, and some of them I think don't have logic, in my mind, in the build of their frameworks, but obviously things mean particular to them. And I think Eve was saying yesterday, and I've seen it as well, that sometimes we have words in our level descriptors that you wrote them, and then 5 years later you look at them and think, what did I really mean by that word, or did I really mean this? And so the meanings can change over time. And also, as the years progress, I think you become more keen to get the words exactly right, where maybe in the first drafts it is an agreement, and then you tend to refine them over time. Australia's first one was quite more detailed than that, and had communication in it, for example, and reporting in it. And we vary slightly to New Zealand in some of our domains. But it is because we believe that people should be able to demonstrate the domains no matter where they learnt or got that learning from. And they may or may not be responsible for others, for example, which is one that we have difficulty with. So we try not to go into domains that imply a certain structure or work life. So I'm not sure if I've just rambled, but it is very difficult, and getting the right amount of levels, I think it's difficult. People ask me how many levels are good. I probably suspect something, and I have done some analysis of different ones, and it's actually quite interesting how many learning levels are embedded in frameworks, even though we might have 10.
I think the approach that we have taken is that we also have three domains. We have knowledge, skills and application, or attributes, and we take them as quite broad kinds of domains. And the distinction for me is that I have seen other frameworks that may have more domains, but they perhaps define them more narrowly. And I would reiterate Andrea's point that it really depends on what works and what is necessary for your society and the economy and the way your education system is structured. I don't think there is one clear answer. There is significant challenges in building each of those things from level 1 to whatever level you end up with. And so sometimes less is more. Sometimes to have fewer domains makes it easier to articulate, but you may have to articulate a wider range of things within each of those domains. And I think we're being presented with some new challenges with the technological changes that are happening now and happening so fast, and the notion of what are the skills of the future and how do we ensure that our qualifications frameworks are ready to prepare people and have qualifications that meet those needs of the future. So my suspicion is that our domains will change, particularly in the application area and possibly the skills area, as we know more about the unknown. We don't know what the skills that will be required are, but we believe we have an understanding of the precursors for those skills. So I think that there will be a shift in that way. But for us, we stuck to quite wide classifications, and there are some areas within the framework where sometimes we think, is it clear enough what the difference between a level 3 and a level 4 is, or a level 4 and a level 5? But that's part of the evolution. It isn't static, and it can't be.
Professor Bastian, as we go ahead with our designs and the evolution of them, how do we ensure that we don't end up with the lowest common denominator? That's the word you use in your presentation. Clearly, when we come up with a framework, we have huge ambitions of what we are going to do with our nation and the outcomes that we can achieve. Perhaps you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, one needs to be ambitious. Absolutely, because otherwise you will end up with the lowest common denominator. And you need a clear vision what you want to achieve with a framework. And here it is about creating a unified system. It is bringing the different sectors together, have them talk the same language, describe their qualifications according to the same terminology, using learning outcomes, which are then linked to the level descriptors. It is a balancing act because you need to be ambitious, but you also need to be realistic at what can be done. So that's what I tried to say before. You can't view the qualifications framework as the universal panacea that is going to solve every single issue. And there will be challenges still attached to this. So if I connect this to the question the lady was asking. having a framework doesn't necessarily guarantee that all qualifications will automatically have learning outcomes. No, that is the providers, the awarding bodies, the institutions which need to work on this. They need to reform their qualifications, and that means they also have to change the mentality of how you think about qualifications and the mentality of all the teaching staff that will then do the actual work in the classroom. So if you have learning outcomes written down, it still means this needs to be translated into the best possible learning, teaching, and assessment methods that actually take place in the classroom. One needs a very clear guideline. One needs clear leadership. One needs a clear understanding of what one wants to achieve with the framework. That should be ambitious, but at the same time realistic and really ensuring a lot of capacity building at all different levels for institutions, for individuals, for everybody who is concerned with it, in order to achieve much more than the lowest common denominator.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome the guests, Saudi Arabia and all that. My first question to Andrea is related to the design of your framework, which is circular versus the hierarchical representations. Is it just a representation, or there is a fundamental difference between it and hierarchical? My second question is probably for Eve. We understand that in NZQA you are both a regulator and an awarding body, and you also award certificates and you develop qualifications. So how can you combine these two roles together? Because maybe in Saudi Arabia we will find ourselves in the same position. Thank you very much.
Let's begin by trying to understand the beauty of a non-hierarchical system. It was really, really intriguing. How does it work?
I think it goes back to the first AQF documents. And we argued very strongly in the early days that we didn't have a levels framework, which is a bit unusual now to even say that. Everybody talks of levels. But we tried to not use the word levels. We said we have these qualification types. And we were trying very much to push this notion that you didn't start a certificate one necessarily and go up. You could possibly come in at different levels. As I said, you could do a bachelor's degree and then find that you don't know how to use a computer, so that you'd go down to a certificate 4. So that movement between the sectors and up and down seems intrinsically important, even in our first edition. And I asked one day why we didn't have a diagram to describe that. And the reason being was we didn't have the IT skills to do it. And it's only in this last iteration in 2011 that we've tried to get that notion of the idea that all qualification types are important and not hierarchical. You could easily turn ours into a hierarchical one. It's very easy. We have 10 levels. We actually identify which ones are on the levels. But we didn't want to do that. So it's only a conceptual thing, and it's probably trying to drive the underpinning philosophy of the framework, which is flexible movement, pathways, linkages. So it's not inherently different.
I may not have been clear. We are not an awarding body at NZQA. We set the regulatory environment and we quality assure all of the organisations, the qualifications programs and other items, and we accredit organisations to provide qualifications outside the university sector. The university have their own body that does that quality assurance. What we do have a function as, which is a little unusual, is that for some industry skill areas, we are also the standard setting body for them. So normally we would have industry training organisations, which are considered the standard setting bodies, and their areas of coverage that industries are responsible for are agreed by our government. But for some areas, there isn't an industry training organisation, and quite interesting areas, some of them are business, because it's such a widespread area. IT is another one, and some of the creative arts and performing arts, those kind of areas. So in those areas, NZQA and a setting body, but it does not do the assessment of those standards other organisations do. But it is still a little unusual relationship.
We had some landmark research done in the mid-90s about the movement of graduates. And we actually found that they were moving on a hierarchical scale downwards. So people were doing PhDs, bachelor's, or whatever, and then going to a polytechnic to do an advanced diploma in business, or an advanced diploma in IT, advanced diplomas in quality auditing. And it was a surprising piece of research because nobody was actually expecting that to be the outcome of that particular research. And I think that changed the thinking in Australia as well. We were always thinking it was going upwards, and in fact it wasn't.
We have a question over there.
Hello, my name is Abdul Hashmi. First of all, I would like to thank you for sharing your experiences with us. My question is to Dr. Eve about the New Zealand framework. You mentioned that you do not distinguish between vocational and higher education in the framework. So I just would like to know a bit more about the why.
Okay, now just one last point I should have said is we do issue certificates on request of some of the employees, so that is one function we take. When I say we don't distinguish between vocational and higher education, we have the same set of rules that apply across all qualifications. So again, it's this notion of keeping it as simple as we can. There are some distinctions between qualifications at levels 1 to 6 and those that are at level 7 and above, which are our degree and awarding ones. But the items that are required to be recorded on the framework in order to identify the qualification are the same. So for us, it's part of creating an integrated system, and we are also looking to encourage people with, say, a level 5 or a level 6 diploma to move into degree level qualifications, and so it helps remove barriers that could intrinsically be there without that.
Our framework doesn't distinguish between TVET or higher education at any point. So all our qualifications can be applied in either sector, technically. But generally speaking, level 1 to 6 is TVET, but we also have bachelor's and vocational and certificates, graduate certificates and graduate diplomas. And there's nothing that precludes that sector to have a PhD either. We did at one stage distinguish between graduate certificates, vocational and non-vocational, and we found that created a discriminative view. So they were one of our small revisions. And so our framework does not distinguish what type of, whether it's a TVET qualification or a higher education qualification. That is purely rests in the quality assurance process. So it makes no statement at all.
ناخذ سؤال من خلف. نعم تفضل.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for entertaining us with such wonderful presentations. I'm really curious to see what has been presented so far. It's a product rather than a process. What still not clear for us is that what's informed the design of these three frameworks? What sort of epistemological and ontological categories, either the British or the Australian or even New Zealand government, has exercised in order to construct these three frameworks? Okay. The crux of the matter is that our historic, ontological, epistemological conceptualization of education would inform the design of this framework. Without understanding these kind of epistemologies, okay, we are not to ask any sort of questions. And paradoxically, throughout these three presentations, constructs such as competency-based learning outcomes have been used in a celebratory way. Okay? And yet, we are talking about lifelong learning at the center. This has been used interchangeably. It creates a lot of trouble for us to conceptualize this kind of arguments, taking into consideration the construct of competency-based and deriving from the positivist or behaviorist framework of education. What are the implications of this when it comes to operationalizing this framework? What are the impacts of the curriculum, policy, pedagogy, and assessment practices? Thank you.
So perhaps we start with Professor Basti. If I understand the question correctly, in summary, there's a deep relationship between the philosophical approach that one takes and the assumptions about lifelong learning and other deeper matters of what learning is in its relationship to society, and whatever framework one ends up designing in the end. And that one cannot take a framework independent of these philosophical assumptions. The gentleman asking the question shared some of the philosophical assumptions he has, revealing some of his background in it. But what is the relationship? What ought we pay attention to? And how did these frameworks emerge, whether in Europe or Australia or New Zealand, out of assumptions that come from a historical context that reflects the philosophies of your countries? Because I guess the relevance for us is that we're a different country of a different environment, and how should we design a framework that is true to our identity, whether religious or cultural or otherwise? I will maybe begin with you, and then we have each of us share. I think it's a very important question.
Thank you. Indeed, that is a crucial question. It touches the question on why do you want a national qualifications framework? Nobody is forcing you to have one. It's an international trend, some say. It might be a fashion, and I know at least of a couple of countries which just introduced it because everybody else is doing this, and hence we also need it. But what is actually required is this kind of reflection. What do we want to achieve with it? And on that basis, you determine how you design it. Dr. Khulud, in her presentation in the very beginning, referred to the definition of the Saudi Arabia qualifications framework. The definition of it gives some ideas about what is supposed to be achieved with this. It is about the unified system. It is about increased quality. It is about speaking the same language. And I believe this has been defined on the basis of the very specific context in the kingdom here, where currently there was not one unified system. There was a lot of separation, maybe artificial separation, but at least factual separation between sectors. It was very difficult to move. And how can this help both? When His Excellency the Governor was speaking about the contribution of such a framework to the Vision 2030. So how can you use a tool? Because indeed you're right, the framework is just a tool to support further changes, to stimulate other kinds of reform. So how can such a framework be supportive of achieving the Vision 2030 in the kingdom? And that is, for example, through high quality education, through integration of the different sectors, through speaking the common language, and you mentioned the use of the concepts of learning outcomes. Those are the elements to most innovative, up-to-date education systems are using this concept because it is more focused on the learner. What can the individual do after their learning process, in terms also of the lifelong learning paradigm? And so in summary, I believe it is really about creating a shared understanding what such a framework is for, to agree between the
through so many different institutions, eventually is now a consultant in human development. So I presume there's something about the history of Australia, its pragmatism, other aspects of the way you look at life behind the desire of wanting to have a framework that in the end gives the opportunity for a human being to start somewhere in life and end up somewhere else. What's the relationship between the philosophy of how we approach education and the way we give opportunity to people to begin somewhere and end up somewhere else?
Okay, I might get back to you in a moment on that question, but I think it is important and has been embedded in our system since its first edition that everybody can move around. It has an equity focus, that everybody can start at Certificate 1 and achieve a PhD if they so wish. And credit transfer and recognition or advanced standing will apply. You don't have to repeat units or subjects. Recognition of prior learning is a right. In the TVET sector, it underpins one of our key standards. It's a policy within our framework to have the opportunity to have access to recognition and credit transfer. So that has been there since really the first edition as part of our argument for the framework. So in essence, I suppose we had a lifelong framework before the term was coined. Going back to the gentleman's comment at the back, when I first developed my first framework, I did a lot of research trying to develop a construct and create logic. Since then, I've sort of eased off on that theory, and I don't believe it's an artificial construct, whatever you do. It's an agreement between your communities about what are your levels of complexity of learning, whatever that agreement is, and that you build that agreement. I actually don't think there are 10 levels of complexity of learning, and Australia has done some statistical work on that. However, we have created a 10-level framework to accommodate the qualifications that we do have. So I think any NQF and its levels is an artificial construct, but it's an agreed one and it's understood by the community itself. So I know that might not help, but to me I think that's what they are.
I think in New Zealand, when we introduced the first framework back in 1991, there was an absolute determination to create a framework that allowed for lifelong learning. We have a pool of people who leave school with inadequate qualifications, and our government and society has always been concerned about the future of those people, and they wanted to create a system that would enable people to learn across and progress and develop so that nobody was left behind. And there was also a commitment, and this was a pure philosophical belief, to that competency-based standards and competency-based assessment was the key to enable this to happen easily. It works in our schooling system. That's what our school qualifications are based on. It has worked quite well in our vocational education. It has been poorly adopted within our more academic education, and that's not because conceptually it couldn't be adopted, it's because of the academic freedom and the other kind of beliefs that go in at higher levels of education on the framework. So I would agree that the framework is a fit for purpose thing. It is something that it is constructed in a way that meets your particular needs and requirements. We also have a strong philosophy that every person should have equivalent opportunities and the opportunity to develop and progress as they wish to. And that is the benefit of the framework. More recently, we have been moving away to some extent from our competency-based framework and much more onto a clearer definition of not so much what people do as they come in, but what are the outcomes they can do at the end of their qualification or the piece of learning. So that's been the drive for us to move to outcomes and a focus on pathways. Did that get what you wanted?
The gentleman down the back also talked about learning outcomes and competency-based. I actually think it's up to the countries to determine what that means. I've analysed 18 East Asia Summit countries, and their definition of competency-based all varies. And once you decide that the definition varies, it also influences the way you describe these competencies, the way you teach these competencies, and the way you assess these competencies. So it's really important that if you do look at competency-based as an approach, then that does have impacts on everything that follows through in the providers.